right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to another episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don Pizzette, back again with Mr. Ronnie Wong. How's it going, Ronnie?
It is going swell this morning. We started off the day with a Bette Midler song, and so we're ready to go.
One of my all-time favorites.
That's right.
I celebrate her entire collection.
I know, constantly.
The guys in the office are tormenting me today with bad music, and Bette Midler, that pretty much sums it up. All right, so today we're going to be taking a look at, well, our scope statement.
Yeah.
In our last episode, we started talking about what's involved in creating our project scope. That's the knowledge area that we're in, and actually here, let me get my PMBOK pulled back up, and we'll kind of jump into that. But basically, we started talking about our scope statement, how it's important, and how we can't really just jump right into the scope statement, how we actually need to jump into some other things first. And so we dealt with requirements yesterday. What do we actually require our project to do to consider it successful? So that's what we were looking at there, was collect requirements, 5.2. Now we're going to take a look at 5.3, which is define the scope. We probably have enough information now to create our scope statement. I say probably because we may have to revisit this a few times, and I know I've said it 100 times by now. It's okay here in planning for us to do that. We make adjustments till we find what fits perfect, right? So let's take a look at that defined scope. Well, before I throw up that process diagram on the screen, let me just start with something really simple. A scope statement is, well, I mentioned earlier that the project charter was the single most important document to the project as a whole, right? Because it's what gives the project manager authority over the project, and it's what allows the project to kick off. So from the perspective of the project as a whole, yes, the project charter is the most important document. The scope statement is a close second place, because the scope statement is what's going to define, beyond a doubt, exactly what it is we need to achieve for this project to be successful. We already did that in the charter, right? In our charter, we put some high-level statements in there, but it's not very detailed. It's not really fully objective. There might be some subjective statements in there. It's not really what we want to live and die by because there's too many gray areas. So as we prepare our scope statement, we've really got to have our ducks in a row. We've got to make sure we understand all our details, what it is we need to achieve, and we put it here. And the scope statement we are going to look at throughout the life of our project. You will constantly be referring back to your scope statement. The charter, you'll probably never look at again, right? It got signed. It's extremely important because it's what gives us that authority, but you don't need to go back to it because we're going to replace everything that's in it with other documents. We're going to supersede them with other ones that are more accurate. The scope statement is the first of these. Now, the scope statement in its most basic form is a paragraph. You write a paragraph. This is what you're going to do, right? But the more detailed you can be, the better off you'll be. All right. So let's start. I'm going to do this one in a little different order, Ronnie.
Sure.
Let's start with what a scope document looks like.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to bring up my template for a scope document, which I've got around here somewhere. Where is my project scope statement? There it is. All right. So here is an example of a project scope statement, and what you'll see is we have several different things that can go in here, and you can be extremely detailed or you can be a little less detailed. Smaller projects you might not need crazy detail, but you're typically going to want to be very thorough here. All right, we're going to put our project scope description, a description of our project, what it is we're going to achieve, what it is we intend to do. And you just write it out plain English style, don't use any crazy technical terms if you can avoid it. Lay out the information about the project, right? The project deliverables, that's going to be what we are going to be producing. And when you produce something, it's really easy to in our mind, lock into the idea of a tangible object, that we're going to produce a physical item, right? And so like our arcade cabinet example,
Right.
We're going to produce an arcade cabinet, a physical item, right? But you might not be producing a physical item. It might be something intangible. Like you might be doing a service improvement. I gave the example in the last episode that if you work for a manufacturing plant, when you manufacture 1,000 pairs of jeans, maybe you have a 20% defect rate. So maybe your project is to get down to a 10% defect rate, right? So it's the process what you're doing to change the company that you're creating. That's your deliverable. All right. So we'll list whatever those deliverables are right here to say when this project is done, here's what we're going to give you. We're going to give you a fully functional arcade cabinet. We're going to give you a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. We're going to give you a fully redundant data center located in another state that you can fail over to in under 3 minutes, right? We specify what that deliverable is going to be. Then your project acceptance criteria, right? How do we know that we're done? If we meet this list of requirements within these range of tolerances, then we're done. And if you disagree, it doesn't matter because right here we specified what had to be met. And if we met that, then it's done, right? This is where it's really important to make sure we don't have any subjective statements, anything where two people could interpret it different ways. So, I want my website to be fast. Okay, how fast, right? How do we measure fast? Because fast to me might be different than fast to Ronnie. Well, that's definitely true, right? Because you've got that satellite internet at home. So, so people's perception of fast is different. So we need to say the page load time needs to be under 1 second, right? Now I've got something measurable. And if it's under 1 second, and then the original sponsor says, well, it still feels kind of slow to me, then you can say, too bad, it's right here, we said 1 second. If you want it less than 1 second, well, we can do another project. Or we can go back and we can update our scope, make some changes, and then move forward with trying to get it even lower, right? But it needs to be right here. That's why we're going to refer back to this document so much. We're going to live and die by this document right here. It's going to determine our success. Now, one thing I like to do is when we list our deliverables and our project scope description, that's what we're going to do. I like to list what we're not going to do. All right, this is a good idea. In fact, let's do an example here. I worked on a project a few years ago that was I'll call it a medium-sized project. It was I worked for a bank, and we had a disaster recovery facility. The headquarters was in Seattle, Washington, and the DR site was in Portland, Oregon. Right, so separate state. It was a few hours away. And the DR site, it was getting pretty old. It hadn't been kept up to date. There were some systems that were production systems that weren't in the DR site. It was a building that we rented or leased. We didn't actually own it. So there were a number of different things that were of concern for us. Right. So we decided we needed a new disaster recovery center. And so we created a project. We kicked it off and said, we want to create a new data center, a disaster recovery center, that recreates all of our necessary systems. And we weren't very picky about where it went. So we had some options there that were part of the project as far as selecting where this location would be and selecting who the hosting provider or the facility was and so on. But as we started specifying our requirements, one of the system admin team, actually it was the system admin manager, he came forward and he said, well, at the time, so this was in like 2007, 2008. Windows Server 2003 was the standard operating system at the time for the bank. We still had many servers that were running Windows Server 2000 at the time, right? And so the sysadmin manager said, well, hey, if we're going to be moving this data center, now would be a great time to upgrade those servers too. Let's go ahead and upgrade them, and because they're going to go offline when we move them and all that. And we looked at it and we said, I understand that you want to upgrade these to Server 2003. I understand. And I understand it looks like a great opportunity to do it because the servers will be offline. But here's the risk, right? We move the servers to this new site and all of a sudden they don't work. Well, is it a problem with the new site or is it a problem with the upgrade that you did, right? Too many changes at once can result in too many problems. So when we created that scope, what we did is we put a specific exclusion that said server configurations will not be updated, right? Servers will be moved or replaced as is, right? Which meant if we had a server that was really old and we had to buy new hardware, that was fine. We'd buy new hardware, but the operating system would stay the same. The software configuration would stay the same. We didn't want to make changes there because it introduced too much risk into the project. We had a window, so we were FDIC insured, and the FDIC said that if we ever had a disaster, we had 72 hours to be back in servicing our customers, right? Now, this was the DR site. So if I shut the DR site down, my customers don't even know it, right? So we had a 3-day window. We could turn off one center, turn on the other, and be back in business. Well, if any problem happened, we had 3 days to resolve it. And if it didn't get resolved in 3 days, well, our customers might not know it. But what if we had a failure at the headquarters at the same time, right? If the headquarters had a failure and the DR site had a failure, we had 3 days, right? And we just didn't want to take that risk. Our customers were more important. And so we put a freeze on that. It's a good idea to put exclusions in to specifically say, we're not going to do this, all right? And so we may have other things that we choose to list in there, that we're not going to bring on new personnel at this time or whatever. Specifically put that in here so that it's right here in the project, black and white. Nobody can argue against it later.
Right.
Best to have that up front. So kind of running with that for the project scope description. For that one, it was this project. We'll see the creation of a new disaster recovery center at a location to be determined by the project, right? In other words, we haven't picked the location yet. That's going to be one of the chores of the project, is to go in and find that location, right? The selected location must meet all the requirements specified by the FDIC, as well as meet all requirements of the SAS70. We'll just say that, which is a U.S. banking regulation that has all sorts of requirements for your data center and how the data works. And then finally, all existing DR functions must be recreated in the new facility, right? And then we added an exclusion which said any production servers not currently present in the DR facility will not be added as a part of this project. And the reason we specified that was, again, we don't want to make too many changes. We were physically moving this data center, so we don't want to add new stuff yet. Once the data center is moved and now it's in the new place, then we can add stuff. That can be project 2.0 or 3.0 or 2.1 or whatever, but not a part of this one. We want to deal with the physical move first. Let's get that done and taken care of. So our project deliverable was a fully functional DR facility that replicates the existing, or the functionality of our existing facility, all right, our existing DR facility. So that was the big deal. We needed a fully functional facility in a new location. That was what we were delivering, all right? The project acceptance criteria for us was really simple, all right? We had a BRP, a business resumption plan, that said, if a failure happened at the headquarters, here's this book full of instructions that you would follow to fail us over to the disaster recovery site and we'd be back in business, right? So project acceptance criteria was the deliverables will be accepted once it has been demonstrated that the current BRP can be followed successfully using the new facility. All right? So if we could take that business resumption plan and go through it step by step and fail our company over to this new center, if that was a success, then the DR site was done, right? We met the requirement. The new DR site was functional, all right? If we couldn't, if we tried to fail over and it didn't work, well, we could fail over to the old site. You've done something wrong, right? That was our acceptance criteria. That was what we looked for. But we do have other things up here, right? That we need to meet the SAS 70 requirements, that we need to meet the FDIC requirements. So, we do have other things, but the primary acceptance criteria was that right there. Can we fail over and complete our BRP? If we can, then we're good.
Good. Oh, constraints. Yeah.
Constraints. So project constraints. What are our 3 constraints, right? We've got
Time.
and schedule.
Yep.
We've got budget, or cost
yep.
and budget. That's how I normally write that. And then we've got our requirements and scope, right? Now, scope/requirements, you might think, well, this is the scope statement, so this is the scope. How can I embed the scope in the scope? Well, when you create your requirement sheet, actually, if you watched our special, on the arcade cabinet project, right? We built our requirement sheet for that, and we came up with all the little things that we required. Well, it's more than what I want to put right here in the scope statement. So here under my project constraints, I may put see
Requirements document.
Exhibit A. All right? And what's Exhibit A going to be? That requirement sheet, right? That requirement matrix or whatever it is that we chose to build, whatever document we created for our requirements, we'll attach that to the scope. So the scope itself is fairly high level here, right? As far as stating what we're going to do and so on. But then see Exhibit A, and you go grab Exhibit A, and it might be 50 pages long of all the individual requirements. In a software development project, you can guarantee it's going to be several pages long. Even for our arcade cabinet, I think we ended up being 2 pages of just different things that we needed to keep in mind as we move forward on the project. All right. Other things, time and schedule. We set a completion date of whatever. I think we did like July 31st or something like that. And then a cost budget, we set it at $2,000, right? Now, for this, well, actually, hang on, we were doing the disaster recovery site, right? So there, our budget was a little bit higher. It was actually $500,000. And our completion date then, I remember it very well, was October 31st, because it was Halloween. Basically, hang on, now I'm thinking back to it, because this project was a while ago. October 31st was actually our drop dead date. We had a lease on the building in Portland that ended on October 31st, all right? So we needed to be out of there by October 31st. But with any good project, you don't want to put yourself on a hard limit like that. So we actually chose to change it to do October 1st. We shot for October 1st because it didn't hurt us to end early. You had 1 month's lease that you had to pay if you were out of there early. But that wasn't a big deal. So you set a date like that, and that way, if you have to push back to October 15th or to October 31st, you're okay. You had some extra time to play, so we left a little bit of padding there. All right, and then lastly, we've got project assumptions. And we can come in here and specify, my pagination is going to make this a little bit weird, but we can specify anything that is semi-uncertain, right?
Yeah, it's unusual, right? This is where the generic definitions of the PMBOK really kind of get you here. So the way they define it is the same way that you and I would define the idea of an assumption. It says anything that we can take as a certainty, but without any proof at all. So in other words, if Don was in the middle of this disaster recovery, well, what if now there was a snowstorm in Oregon and he couldn't get to that? Well, he's assuming that there's perfect weather, that there's never going to be any complications to the physical move at all. He'll be able to get into the building. And again, that is an assumption. There's no way that Don could actually predict that. But at this point, that's a good example that we have.
And those assumptions can change too, right? They can change over time. So just continuing with this DR example, right? So one of the big assumptions we made in the beginning was that we'd be able to pull it off in this time frame, right? We hadn't selected a new data center yet. So were we going to build our own building? Were we going to buy an existing building somewhere? Were we going to co-locate at somebody else's data center? And where were they going to be? We were in Seattle, but this data center could have been anywhere. It could have been in New York. It could have been, it could have been at another building right there in Portland. We had a lot of choices. So under the assumptions, we had a big assumption that we will be able to transport our existing equipment into the new facility within the project time frame. All right. Now, I specifically remember this assumption because it ended up being wrong. We assumed that we'd be able to transport our equipment into this new facility. The facility that we chose was SAS 70 compliant, and they had various requirements. The main requirement was that we weren't allowed in the data center.
Nope.
We actually moved our data to a place that we weren't allowed to go into. So, we took a tour of the facility, and during the tour, we had like guards with us while we did the tour because it was very secure. We weren't allowed to touch anything. So something we didn't realize going into this, because we hadn't picked this place yet, was that the servers, we could take them there, but we weren't allowed to install them. We weren't allowed to put them in the racks. The data center had to do it. They had to do it for us. It was part of their requirements. So part of this transport got a little bit more complex later on than we thought about. The other thing was we initially didn't think much about it, but a lot of our servers weren't encrypted. And that's because they were physically secure. Well, we had to transport them, and chucking them into a U-Haul or something like that, that's not necessarily secure. And so we had to take some extra measures there. We actually had to have security guards. We transported our servers the same way we transported money. They were in armored cars, and they drove across. So it was some things that we just didn't know at this stage. And understand that that's going to happen. That as your project rolls forward, you'll find out things. And something that's an assumption now might turn into a fact later, and then it has to get incorporated into the project. So we'll see that. All right. Once we've got that done, you sign off on it, right? Now, if this is your first draft, don't bother signing off on it. You're wasting your time. That first draft is never the one that you run with. You're going to take this draft and you're going to send it out to the project team and to the stakeholders and to the sponsor, and everybody's going to review it and see if they agree, right? And if they spot anything they want to change, any wordsmithing they want to do, alterations, whatever, then great, you do those, okay? And then you got version 1.1 and version 1.2, and you continue to advance from there. But the scope statement itself is really not that heavy, but it's extremely important, right? So my document now is 2 pages, and I might have a requirement sheet that's another 20 pages that goes online, goes together with this. But for the most part, my statements here are very concise. I tried to pick words that are not debatable, and apparently I got some kind of grammar error here. But we'll ignore it. All right. So we try and pick that, and then we've got a simple document that everyone can refer back to. How do I know if I'm done? How do I know if we've achieved what we want? Go grab the scope statement. It's right there in the scope statement and the requirement sheet. They tell you what you were supposed to do. Are they done? If they aren't, your project's not done, right? So just be on the lookout for little things like this. See Exhibit A. All of a sudden, this single page or 2-page document becomes a 30-page document, right? Those exhibits are pretty important. All right. Now, this information here, I pretty much just made up as we went, right? I didn't make it up. It comes from a prior experience. But if you're the one charged with filling this out, how do we get to the point that we can fill this out? How do we get to where we have that information? That's where the scope statement process comes in, which I've got parked right here. So we've got the define scope process that tells us what we do to start to build up this scope statement and get it defined. All right. Now, we'll start with the inputs. This is one of those, and you see this a lot in the early stages of the project, that pretty much everything you have becomes an input. So we've got a project charter, so that's going to be an input. We've got a requirements document that we drafted in the last episode, so we've got that, we bring that in, and then our scope management plan, if we have one, which is going to tell us how we go about drafting it. And the scope management plan might be very simple. It might just say, use this scope template, and off you go, right? Or it might have something far more detailed. The only other thing we've got are organizational process assets, which would be the templates and other resources we might have available. All right. So we take that information, and based on it, we start to create the scope statement, right? And you can do what I did and just grab that template and start filling it out, or we've got several tools and techniques that we can use. So what I did a minute ago, that was expert judgment. I just used what was in my head, in memory in that case, and kind of just wrote it out there. And you can do that. Small, medium project, that's probably fine. In a large project, though, you need to be a little more detail-oriented, and so we've got other things. All right. Number 2, product analysis. This is one that we can spend a lot of time on because we're looking at the product, what we're going to produce, our final deliverable, and we analyze it to break down what all decisions have to be made to create it. I gave an example of this in the last episode on a website. Somebody says, I want a website and I want it to have fancy menus where you float your mouse over it and they drop down, and I want to have it where it looks very modern and it's fast. So you take that to your subject matter expert and you show it to them and they go, okay, well, they want to have fancy menus. What do they want in the menus? What menu items do they need, right? What exactly is going up there? And they want it to look modern. What does that mean? Do they want flat logo images? Do they want multiple colors? Do they want it to be black and white? What is it exactly that they want? And we start to refine that and get more and more detailed information. That's a part of product analysis. All right. You might have a end design already figured out, but getting to that point is part of the challenge. All right. Now the PMI, they break down several different components of product analysis. And do I have this document? Let's see. Somewhere around here, I've got this document. Not here. Ronnie made some really good notes on this. I want to pull them up. Now I got to figure out where I put them though. This is planning.
It might even be in the part one there. I don't know why. It may still be in there. That kind of groups a lot of stuff together.
Here we go. Define scope. There we go. All right. So you'll see the PMI breaks down product analysis, and they break it down into a number of different things. So what I was talking about, that was product breakdown, right? We take that product and we break it down into its individual components. We figure out all the different things that need to be determined here early on, right? We also have systems analysis. Systems analysis is basically the same thing as product breakdown. Product breakdown is when you have something physical, a website, a 2016 Ford Focus, something that you're physically producing. A systems analysis, that's when we're dealing with something that's a little more logical, right? I'm trying to get our defect rate from 20% down to 10%. Okay, what all is involved in manufacturing these blue jeans? What systems are involved in that? How do they interact? How do those systems work together? So we got one system that actually cuts the fabric, another system that stitches the buttons on, another system that stitches the fabric together. Well, where are our defects coming from? Where do we need to focus in on this? How do these systems tie together? And then that's going to start to set some of the scope of our project too. So systems analysis, very similar to product breakdown. All right, requirements analysis. We get a list of requirements from our sponsor or whoever. Now we start to look at those requirements to identify additional information we need. This is where a subject matter expert can really help, right? They can look at it and find those additional questions that we need to break down. All right. The next two, systems engineering and value engineering, right? Systems engineering, this is saying, all right, we've got multiple systems involved in this process. Do we need to make changes to them? Are we going to have to reinvent them? How detailed are we going to have to get in here? And so we might have to create new systems to achieve what we want, or we might be able to retrofit existing systems to achieve what we want. And the other thing is, there might be other projects that are going on at the same time that are doing the same type of thing. We might be able to integrate those projects together. There might be overlap there to be able to save time and resources. And so that's where systems engineering comes in, is finding where we can create these new systems or modify the ones we have. Value engineering, this one's a little bit different, all right? If my goal, the thing that I want to produce is an item, right? The 2016 Ford Focus, right? There are ways that I can build value into that product from the very beginning, right? I don't have to, but I can. When you buy a car today, a lot of cars come with a 30,000 mile warranty, right? So for the first 30,000 miles, it's under warranty, and if something goes wrong, they'll fix it for you. But there's other cars out there that come with a 100,000 mile warranty, right? Do they have to do that?
Nope.
They don't, right? They choose to because they get good marketing out of it, and maybe they trust their cars enough, or they just know the expense won't be that great, so they do it anyway. That's a part of value engineering. We can choose to build that value into our product if it's required, or if we just feel like it's the right thing to do, right? That kind of goes hand in hand with value analysis. We can look at a system and say, you know what, in our prototype for the 2016 Ford Focus, we did an all steel body, right? What if we went to, what's that really
fiber?
cheap?
No, that's expensive.
Kevlar? Carbon fiber is probably fine. What do they make those like John boats and stuff, the cheap fishing boats? What are those made out of?
Fiberglass.
Fiberglass, there we go.
Okay.
What if we went with I was trying to think of something super cheap. Carbon fiber is not always cheap. But what if we went with a fiberglass body, or like the Saturns, the plastic body, right? We don't have to have steel. And somebody might say, well, if we want our customers to survive a crash, we probably don't want to go plastic. And somebody else might say, well, you know what, we could go with a plastic body, but we could build in a stronger cage inside of it so it's structurally sound even though it's got a plastic body. And so you start looking at things like that and you say, all right, is the value of having a steel body worth it? Is the value of going with something less expensive worth it? Because sometimes you go less expensive and then you create a piece of junk and people don't buy it, so you hurt the project by going cheap. So value analysis is where we weigh the odds on that. We look at the materials that we're choosing and we say, is this the right decision? Because sometimes we manufacture something in plastic just because it was easy, not because we had some other reason for it, not because it saved us money or anything. It might just be that whoever was the designer, that was the material they had sitting there at the time, right? We're going to build this arcade cabinet. Well, we could use really nice wood. We could get some well, you probably wouldn't want cedar, but we could get oak or something like that and build this cabinet. It'd be incredibly expensive. But if we just happen to have a couple of sheets of plywood laying around, we might choose to use that just because it's here, right? Well, we might want to do some value analysis on that and say, well, over the years, that plywood is not going to hold up. It's gonna break down and it's going to look terrible. So there will be some value in going ahead and using a higher quality material. Right? That's value analysis. All right. So all of that falls under product analysis, this general umbrella. You have to look at what you're producing, service or good, tangible or intangible, and figure out questions that haven't been asked, right? All the different details and get that nailed down. This will really become part of your requirements list. All right. We got a few others, but I think I talked a little too long, so I see our timer's run out. So let's do this. Let's stop and take a break. Okay. When we get back, we're going to talk about some of the other tools and techniques we have with generating that scope statement, and then we'll see about wrapping that one up and moving on. We still have our work breakdown structure and a few other things to get to. So let's stop here, and we'll see you back in a few minutes. All right, welcome back, everybody. So we got a couple more tools and techniques to cover as far as developing our scope statement. The next one is one that I like. It's actually kind of a neat one. It's called alternatives generation. And basically, when your sponsor comes to you and kicks off this project and gives you what they want, it's your job to figure out how you're going to achieve it. And there is usually more than one way to achieve what the sponsor is asking for. So what you need to do is you need to get creative and try and think of the different ways. If you just take the first solution that comes along, it might work, but there might be other solutions that have less risk or are more cost efficient, work better in a certain time schedule. There's always different ways that we can kind of solve that problem. So alternatives generation is simply a process of us figuring out what alternative means do we have for achieving this goal. All right. For example, we want to design the 2016 Ford Focus. Do we design an entirely new car, or do we just take the 2015 and maybe make some minor tweaks to it and remarket it as the 2016, which is what they usually do. So do we go that route? So you got some kind of choices there, and then if it's something like building a house, there's more than one way to build a house. You can build it fully custom, or you can do a modular design where you just buy the components and stick them together. So tons of different options there. You need to take a look at each of the alternatives and choose which one best meets the needs of the sponsor.
Yeah. Sometimes because we're limited just because of the way that we're used to doing things, we don't think that there may be more than one particular approach doing it. And we may find out that another approach is actually better than the way that we were thinking about. So always keep an open mind even at this point, even though you're starting to define the scope and trying to figure out, is there another way that we can approach this?
Yeah, and this is something that I've learned repeatedly over the years. I have a networking background. I've been a network manager for several companies. I've worked with Cisco and Juniper networking equipment for a long time. And I know a lot of stuff about the equipment just because I've used it so long. I'm not special or anything. I've just used it a lot. And so when somebody asks me to do something, to configure a network or implement something using Cisco equipment, I know at least one way to do it. But there's always other ways. And when I talk with other network engineers, I learn. I learn every time. You're always seeing something new because I may have deployed it in one environment that had one set of needs, but there's other environments with different needs that modify how that technology is deployed. So you always want to be open-minded, bring in subject matter experts or contractors or somebody to get their opinions too, and kind of put it all together. So some of the ways we do that, brainstorming, we've already talked about. You get a bunch of people in a room and you say, anybody got some other ideas? Let's just throw them out here, right? You also do what's called lateral thinking, all right? Lateral thinking is where we look at the steps to achieve our goal, all right? And we say, okay, we're going to pick this one step. We can't do it. What are our other options? Think of a lateral solution that does the same thing. So if we talk about like building a house, and step one of building the house is to lay the foundation, all right? And so we come in and we say, all right, let's pretend that for some reason we can't lay a foundation.
Yeah.
What else can we do? Well, you can build a house without a foundation. You can do the raised, what do they call that? It's
stilts, house on stilts.
Well, you can do still. I didn't even think of that, right? Here in Florida, it's
House
almost
on
like
stilts.
one giant floodplain. So you'll see houses that are built 8 foot off the ground on stilts. You can park your car under the house. You'll also see some that are only like a foot off the ground, though. And I'm not talking about like mobile homes or trailers. I'm talking about actual houses that are just a foot off the ground or so, and they'll have giant cement
Pylons and stuff.
pylons, that's the word I'm looking for, that they rest on, and instead of an actual cement foundation. So what are the pros and cons, right? Is there a benefit of going one way over another? With the pylon solution, somebody can come in and throw some pylons down in a day, and then you're off and building. But if somebody pours concrete slab down, you got to wait a couple of days so that it dries, that it gets in there, and your plumbers have to put the plumbing in so that it's in the foundation, versus if they do the raised off the ground one, the plumbers can come in and do it whenever, because they can just get right there into the house. So it's an alternative solution to how we achieve the same goal, right? Which one's going to be better for us? It depends. I know a lot of people prefer to have the cement slab down, because when you walk through the house, it sounds solid. But if you're in one of those raised houses, you can hear your footsteps echo. Now, if you're from the northern United States, you probably have a basement anyway, so it really doesn't matter. But here in Florida, we can't have basements because the water level's 1 inch down. So you dig 1 inch down and you hit water. So we don't have that here. So again, different areas, you're going to have different solutions. Up there, up north, you may do a basement. So that really influences things. So lateral thinking is just taking individual components and saying, is there something else I can do? I find it's better to break it down to individual components. Because if you just look at the whole thing, all right, we're going to build this house this way. What's another way to do it? Well, when people think big picture, it's hard to come up with an alternative. But if you take it down to one component, this one component, all right, for whatever reason, we can't do that. What else do you got, right? That's what lateral thinking is all about. And analysis of alternatives. Just because there is an alternative doesn't mean it's a good one, right?
That's right.
So sometimes you'll get people that have recommendations that are fine, they're good recommendations, but they just don't work out because too high a cost or something of that nature. And I just watched a movie a few weeks ago that was talking about how some of the early computers were designed, and it had this little bit on Steve Jobs and how they were pushing out one of the Apple computers, and they wanted to put one processor in it that cost a normal amount of money, but Steve Jobs wanted a higher end processor in there. So he said, put in this higher end one. And it made the price of the computer go up, and nobody bought it, and it was a failure. So it was a terrible decision. But that should have been looked at. It was. He was kind of a jerk, and so he did it anyway. But you have to look at that and say, all right, well, we got two processors we can pick from. Sure, this other one is faster. That's nice. But the cost is going to make it higher, which is going to make it reach less of our customers, and it's going to be less successful. We shouldn't go that route, right? So just because an alternative exists doesn't mean that it's a given. Doesn't mean you should go that route. You've got to weigh them together. And so we'll see analysis of alternatives throughout this show, especially when we get into procurements and bidding. We're going to see how we can compare different elements together and make those decisions. But for right now, we'll just go with the more general concept of you just need to compare. You need to look at them and determine which one is really going to be the most beneficial. The last tool is another one we've already talked about, which is facilitated workshops. So facilitated workshops, those are just where we have a meeting. We get some people together and we come up with a series of questions, an agenda that we go through, and we try and come up with some answers, things that will become part of our scope. All right. With all that information in hand, Now we're ready to go and draft that project scope statement. Now, the scope statement, if this is the first draft, then we're going to do what I did at the beginning of the show, just go through and fill it out, right? But then when you're done, you're going to send it out to everybody. They're going to evaluate it, and then you're going to go through this process again and potentially update it, all right? When the scope statement is done, there's things in here that might have changed. Our constraints, our time, cost, scope, those might have changed from what the original project charter stated, from what the original requirements list stated, things like that. We might have found new things. So we're going to start seeing this with processes from here on out. Most of our processes are going to include two outputs. One, which is whatever it is we were trying to produce, and the second one is project document updates. And that means we might have found something new, and we need to go back and update some of our existing project documents. We might need to go and update our project management plan to reflect something new that we're doing here. We might need to go and update our requirements list. You typically don't go and update the charter. Usually the charter stays the way that it was, but you may have to come back in and revise this document. If you've already produced your scope statement, then when you run through here a second time, you're doing an update to the scope statement. So we'll start seeing that project document update on each of the processes that we look at. All right, when you're done, you should be left with a scope statement that adequately defines what you're going to do. And this scope statement will serve as a basic checklist. At the end of this project, when everything's said and done, you should be able to grab the scope statement and read through it. And you should be able to say, okay, did we create a new data center at a location that we selected? All right, yes or no? Is the location, does it meet the FDIC requirements, and is it SAS 70 compliant? Yes or no, right? Is all existing, or was all existing function at the old center recreated in the new center? Yes or no, right? And then we just kind of keep going. Did we replicate that functionality? Were we able to complete a BRP failover, right? Were we able to flip over to it and it functions properly? Yes or no? Did we exclude these things? That's easy, right? Because we're usually good about that. Did we get it done by October 1st? Did it cost less than 500 grand? Did we meet all the requirements in Exhibit A? Yes or no? And then, the assumptions you don't really have to follow up on at this point. But you could say, were these assumptions realistic? Did we meet those? Yes or no? If we answered yes to all of those questions, this project is done, right? We've completed it. It's a success. But if we answered no to any of those questions, the project is not done and the project's a failure. Well, it's a failure if you're past this date and you're at your budget, right? But if you still have time left and you still have budget money left and you still have resources, then you can keep moving. So you use this as a checklist throughout your project. This becomes the guiding element of your entire project. And that's where I say the charter is the most powerful document. It's what empowers the project manager and kicks off the project, gives it authority. But this document is the one that serves as the guide throughout the whole rest of the project. All right. As such, this document is very special. Changes to this document could change your whole project. If you start adding new requirements to our requirements register, right, or Exhibit A, if we start adding more requirements there, they might cost us more money. They might require more time. So we run the risk of failing, right? If we need more time or we need more money, we need to come and update the scope statement to reflect that we got more money, that we got more time, right? So changes to this need to be strictly controlled. And we're going to have a show just on change management later on where we'll address that. But this document, changes to it should not be taken lightly after the planning phase. Right now we're in planning, we change it all we want, right? But once we get out of planning, we really need to try and keep this set in stone and not deviate from it. All right. Now we have an idea of what we need to do. Let's figure out how we're going to do it. All right. As a project manager, the odds are you're not going to be a subject matter expert for what your project does. Okay. So, for example, for me, at the bank, I was the network manager, the network side. I know the network side. So when it came to moving data lines and IP, setting up VPN tunnels, redundant links and stuff, I knew that world, and my network team, they knew that world. So the network side of that project was easy for me. But on the system admin side, sure, I know Windows Server and stuff, but I didn't know the applications that our bank ran because I didn't have to deal with those. I wasn't the apps guy. I wasn't the sysadmin guy. So for that side of it, I was dependent on other people. And as we all started to plan this project out, I had to work with them to say, okay, what work are you guys going to have to do to move these servers over, to not lose data, to keep things operational? What work do you have to do? And we all had to come up with basically lists that show the actual work that's going to be done in the execution process. All right. The way we come up with that list is by using something called a work breakdown structure. And I showed a work breakdown structure briefly in terms of just the diagram yesterday, I think, in the show. So here's what a work breakdown structure diagram looks like. You don't have to do a diagram. I usually don't. I kind of hate these because they're not very flexible. But I normally do like an outline in Word or Excel when I do a work breakdown structure. But this is a diagram. And basically what we do is we take our project and we say, here's our project. And for our project to be a success, we need to create something, a process, a good, whatever it is that we're doing. And so we break that up into the deliverables that we're going to create, all right? And then we say, all right, to achieve this deliverable, what do we need to do? So maybe Ronnie and I, we decide we're going to write a textbook. I've talked to you about this for years. I wanted to write an Active Directory group policy book for years. So maybe we decide finally to do it, right? So deliverable number one for us would maybe be coming up with a table of contents, right? What are we going to cover, right? So deliverable number one is that table of contents. And then deliverable number two is, let's write the book. Right. So we're gonna write this book. Deliverable number three might be to secure a publisher and print the book. Right. And so that's our project. Once it's printed, then we're done. So we got three deliverables: table of contents, the rest of the book, and the physical book printing. All right. So we need to say, okay, for a table of contents, what actual work needs to be done? Well, it's easy to think of some of these things. We can say, well, I need to just write a table of contents. Well, table of contents are kind of an outline. You've got your main areas and then the individual areas underneath each one that you want to tackle. So we have to start coming up with that list of all the stuff that's in there. So we've got to have an agreement. Ronnie and I have to agree on the topics we want to cover. Right. And then we probably need to divide them up between each other so that, you get half, I get half, and so we're not overwhelmed with trying to write the whole book ourselves. Right. So we start breaking this process down. And at the end of the day, we come up with a list of the actual work that needs to be completed to achieve that deliverable. So when it comes to printing, we might have to have a graphics designer create the artwork for our book. It might have to get submitted to the printer. They have to print it out, right? They have to typeset it or whatever they do. The binding, the printing, the shipping, all of these are actual work elements that we need to identify, right? Now, each of these are what are called work packages. A work package, and this is the official term, what you'll see on the exam, a work package is just a granular or compartmentalized segment of work that needs to be performed that when combined with other work packages results in the production of your deliverable, right? The hardest part about creating a WBS is identifying all the work that is necessary, because it's really easy to leave things out. And if you leave things out, it's going to make it hard to schedule or to determine schedule and budget later on. So we've got to be thorough. So we've got several tools available for us to help make sure that we're thorough about it, and we're going to get a chance to see those. Let me bring up I'm already in here. Where is my create a WBS? All right. So we have a WBS process, create the work breakdown structure process, and you'll see tons of inputs, right? Pretty much everything we've got. Scope management plan, the scope statement, the requirements documentation, enterprise environmental factors, organizational process assets. We've already talked about all of those. So basically it's saying, gather up everything you've got. Everything that you've got, get it together. The only thing we're leaving out here is like the stakeholder analysis, the stakeholder register. But every other document is here. So we gather those together, and then we get to work. All right. Now, getting to work really falls down to just a couple of tools: decomposition and expert judgment. All right. Now, expert judgment is dangerous. With expert judgment, that's where we say, okay, we need to build a house. What actual work needs to go into building that house? Well, I don't know. Let me just bring in somebody who builds houses for a living. They've done it a ton of times. They know all the stuff. Let me get it from them, right? Or we could do what I've been doing in the show and just say, well, let me figure. I think you got to lay a foundation, right? And you got to put some walls up, and you got to put a roof on it, and you got to put some drywall up, and you got to paint it and put carpet in, right? But I just named off all that stuff. I didn't mention you got to get it plumbed.
Right.
You got to get electricity run. You probably have to pull some permits. And let's go even further back. You might need to buy some land, right? So these are things that I didn't think of because I don't build houses. It's not what I do. I never have. So it is important that when we say expert judgment, that it's actually an expert.
Yeah.
And you are an expert in project management. You're not necessarily an expert in whatever it is that your project is doing. You know how to manage the project. You don't necessarily know how to do what the project is requiring. So make sure that you identify the right experts. And if you're bringing in a contractor or somebody, get 2, right? Get a second opinion. Get 3 if you can afford it. Because if you've got one project manager telling you all the stuff necessary to build that house, another one might tell you even more, all right? So what we'll typically do is a process called progressive elaboration. All right, progressive elaboration is another term you'll see on the exam. Is sure, I might start high level. So I'll start with what's in my head. I want to build that house, lay foundation, put up walls, put up roof, drywall it, stick some carpet in there, paint it, done. Right, sell it or whatever it is that we're going to do with it. that might be good for a first draft. Then I say, okay, anybody here in the room, anybody built a house before or had one built for you? And maybe Jason, our director, says, yeah, I did it. So he starts telling me some of the stuff they went through, so I add to it, right? A second round, I'm elaborating, I'm adding more, breaking some of it down. And then I say, okay, that's good. Now it's time for an expert. Let's go get an expert and get somebody who actually builds houses. So we could bring in our friend Eric Gonzalez, right? He comes by every couple of weeks. So we go to get Eric. Eric builds houses for a living. And so he builds expensive houses, so I've never had him build one, but he builds them. And so I can go and get Eric and say, Eric, hey, you do this for a living, man. Can you take a look at this and break these packages down? And he'll look at it and go, gosh, this is like kindergarten. So then he'll take it and really break it down. So when I say something simple like lay foundation, he'll look at it and say, well, we need to bring this machinery in to pack the earth and level it first, right? We got to clear it and pack it. Then we got to have wood framers come in and put the frame in for where the foundation is going to be. Then we've got to have our concrete guys come in and pour the concrete. Then we've got to have our meter guys come in to run. They have this like radioactive thing they push around to measure the density of that concrete to make sure it poured levelly and there's no like giant bubbles in there. And then you've got to have just step after step after step. He knows that stuff. He knows it because he does it for a living. So he's building on it more. And you want that. You want more than one set of eyes on this work breakdown diagram because you might know the deliverable and you can think of some high-level activities, but then that expert comes along and they take that high-level activity and they break it down into additional work packages that are smaller. All right. Now, here's a key thing that may not seem like common sense, but on the exam it's important. In a work breakdown structure, if you have a work package and you break it down into sub-packages, this work package should not actually be work itself. Okay, there's 0 work associated with this entity right here, 2.1. But instead, if activity 2.1.1 and 2.1.2, if those 2 work packages get done, they complete this work package. All right, so these guys, deliverable 2, activity 2.1, those are just placeholders. And then it's the lowest level that actually represents true work. All right. So this might say lay foundation. And then I have work packages for all the work, the actual work that needs to be done to lay that foundation. And when all of these are done, this one is automatically done. There's no actual work associated with that element. Versus over here, these have no sub-elements. So these are actual work, right? So it's whatever the lowest tier is. These are actual work. This is actual work. This is not. It's a placeholder. This is not. It's a placeholder. The project as a whole is a placeholder. This is the actual work. The lowest level here, the lowest level inside of that tree is the actual work package. Somebody has to go and do this physical work to get this done. All right. That's what a work breakdown structure is all about. And you're not going to get it on the first draft unless you're repeating a project that's been done before. If you're building a house, odds are you're not the very first person to build a house ever. So there's probably a work breakdown structure in your environment that already shows the stuff that needs to be done. Now, houses can be customized, so you might have some unique stuff that's in there, but the overall process for building a house is going to be the same. So you may start out with a work breakdown structure that already has some data in it, and then you just elaborate. So progressive elaboration, that's an important term. Remember that one, because it will turn up. All right, well, Ronnie, looking at the clock, it is about time for us to stop and take a break.
Right.
So why don't we pause here? When we get back, we're going to talk more about the work breakdown structure. We've got a few other tools and techniques and things that are in there, and so we're going to look at that and kind of see how that process works. So we'll stop here, and we'll see you back in a few. Ready? All right, so now we're going to continue on with the old work breakdown structure, right? One of the components here inside of our tools and techniques is decomposition, right? Which is somewhat morbid, I always thought. But all it means is taking a work package and breaking it down into its subcomponents and continuing to do that until we get down to the smallest component. Now, you don't want to go too crazy, you know. The thing I always remind myself is that this is not corresponding to schedule and budget yet, but eventually we're going to want to track this with the schedule and budget. But for right now, we're just trying to think of the work that needs to be done. Don't worry about who's going to do the work. We'll figure that out in the human resources processes. Don't worry about how much it's going to cost. We'll do that in the budget side. If you have that information, though, it can save you some time. So decomposition just means we're decomposing an activity into its smallest parts. We're breaking it down and kind of building our project from there. So if we take something like building a house, right? So I already said that, hey, if I want to build, we'll just say build a house, right? I want to build a house. So that's what I want to do. And at a high level, I know we need to do a few things, right? We need to buy some land, right? We need to lay foundation. We need to put up walls. I think they call that framing the house, right? So we need to frame the house. We need to put on a roof. We need to put in, we need to plumb it. We need to get electric. We need to drywall. We need carpet. And we need paint. All right? When all that's done, I'm done. My house is done, right? But that's just the first stage. I got my high level stuff. Now I need to break it down even further, okay? So let's take buy land. I want to buy some land for the house, right? So what's actually involved in that? What actual work do we have to do? I'm going to decompose, I'm going to break down the buy land work package into smaller work packages, right? So what do we have to do? I think most people start with step one is secure a realtor. Right? So we got to get somebody to help us find some land. It would probably be a good idea to come up with requirements for the land. You know,
How much?
If you're going to build a big house, you need a lot of land, or maybe it's a small house, but you just want a lot of land because you got pets or kids or whatever, and you want that area. Maybe you want that land to be near town, in town, out of town, whatever. You know, you've got requirements. So we need to come up with that list of requirements for the land. All right. We need to select the land. Right. We're going to get some choices. We're going to have to pick the land that we want before we can buy it. We may need to secure financing. And if we're going to secure financing, we probably need to. Well, hey, I'll talk about that in a second. What else might we need there, Ronnie?
I can't think of anything much else.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
So we're done. Now we know all the work to buy land, right? Not necessarily. Now we do another pass, and we see if we can decompose this further. Secure a realtor. What's that going to take?
Yeah.
Okay. So we need to get a list of realtors. We need to compare realtors and select a winner, right? We have many realtors to choose from. How do we know which one we want, right? We need to get a list of the realtors. Well, how do we get that list of realtors? Now we break this down and we say that we can call what's the Realtor Association? There's a,
and
it's the American Association of Realtors or something like that. So I'll just say call the Realtor Association, right? We can look at trade materials. These would be things like, you see the house buyer's guides and stuff like that that are on every street corner.
We may get referrals.
Get referrals from friends. Apparently I don't know how to spell referrals. A couple extra R's in there. We might check the phone book.
Yep.
Right? Now I'm putting here, some of these sound kind of dumb, right? But checking the phone book, for somebody to get the phone book, go in there, find the realtors, make a list, that takes time.
Yeah.
This is time that's measurable. That's an element that's going to have to be done. Somebody's going to have to do this. This is work, actual work. Another thing that's worth mentioning here, I kind of wrote this out chronologically, but it isn't necessarily in chronological order here. I'm just trying to figure out the work that needs to be done. We'll worry about timing later, because we may find, for example, that maybe the electric has to go into the house before the plumbing. I don't know. Maybe they can be done at the same time. So these two events might actually be occurring simultaneously. So don't worry about the chronological order yet, right? All right, I think we've probably broken this one down as far as it needs to go. When do you stop? When do you decide not to break it down any further? Well, it's kind of up to you. I usually break it down to the point where I know that one person can achieve that, or one team can achieve that job without further direction. So if I tell somebody to check the phone book and get me a list of realtors, there's not really much more I can do to break that down. I could specify what phone book or whatever, but they're pretty much going to know what to do at that point. You also don't want to micromanage because it's going to limit people's productivity. So we want to leave some room for them to reach their own decisions.
Yeah, when it comes down to the PMBOK, they kind of describe this a little bit unusually, right? The idea of breaking it down in terms of decomposition is decomposing it to the point where it's a manageable work unit, right? A manageable work package. So you don't have to micromanage and go, make sure you choose this phone book, Don, not this one, but so that you're able to say, okay, remember, these are the steps you have to do. You can actually manage it. And so you may at that point leave that leeway and then you don't decompose it any further. I said, remember, you can only do this on Tuesday and Wednesday, but not on Friday.
Yeah. And now we would need to continue and decompose the other elements. So compare realtors and select a winner. So someone is going to have to choose selection criteria. Someone's going to have to choose or somebody's going to have to determine the criteria values for each realtor, right? So, maybe one of my criteria is how many houses have they sold in this neighborhood in the last year, right? So realtor A might have 500 houses, realtor B might have 100 houses, right? So I need to know what the criteria are, and then I need to find out the criteria for each realtor. Then I need to assign a weight to each criteria, because some are going to be more important than others, right? So I need to determine which ones are more important to me, and then finally I need to select the winner. Select who it is that's actually going to be our realtor, all right? So you do this, you repeat this for each of these, and you might only have to go one level deep. You might have to go 5 levels deep. For me, starting here at the parent, I went 1, 2, 3, 4 levels deep to get to my actual work packages here. I might find later on something like carpet, it may only go down 2 levels, because I might have a work package under here which is find a contractor and one that's hire it. So basically just pay somebody else to worry about it. They will have to break it down even further for themselves. Right. But when you get like a fixed rate quote, you don't care what they have to do. You've got $1 sign you pay and they're going to do it. So you're basically pushing that off. You're kind of outsourcing. It's like a sub project at that point, getting the carpet installed. So you just have to revisit this and continue to decompose all the way down until you get it to that manageable work package where it's something that's it's got to be trackable, right? We got to be able to monitor its progress and know when it's done. So don't have something subjective in there, and then basically break it down to that. I usually do outlines just like what you see here. I usually do them in Microsoft Word because it has this nice outline view that lets you collapse and expand and stuff. But you can do it this way, or you can do what they show in the PMBOK, which is a design like this. This is called a work breakdown structure diagram. You can do both. If you can start with an outline and then turn it into a diagram, and if you're using some software out there like Microsoft Project, you can generate these. Again, for me, I don't typically do these, but the other thing is these don't always make sense because they're not following a chronological order or whatever. Usually when I deal with diagrams, I worry about it when we get to the scheduling side. All right, so once we've done all of that, now we've got our work breakdown structure. We've got the you know what? This is wrong. My outputs are wrong. Hang on a second. So our outputs here. Are my outputs right?
No, your outputs are right. It's just a couple that we didn't add in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
the WBS itself and the
once we start to create the WBS, that's why I said the output's wrong. If we're creating a WBS, that should be one of our outputs. So let me pull it up in the PMBOK so I make sure I show you guys the right thing. We are creating the WBS, which is 5.4. So let me just jump up to that in the book here. And well, here, I'll find the diagram. It should be right around here. Collect requirements and. You know, it's convenient that there we go, right here. Create a WBS, and I am right. That is interesting. I would have assumed that the WBS was one of the outputs, but all right. So one of our outputs here is just the scope baseline, which includes the WBS, so that works. I could have swore it was actually listed as its own element. I shouldn't have doubted my own notes.
I listed it as its own element.
All right. Well, when we talk about our outputs, what are we outputting? Well, the work breakdown structure, right? The work breakdown structure, that list of work that needs to be done. Well, the work that needs to be done, it's being done to fulfill the needs of your scope. And so you'll see what's listed here as the scope baseline. Now that term baseline, what does that mean? A baseline is a snapshot, a point in time reference. This is the work that needs to be done as we know it right now. Through the life of your project, changes are going to happen. You're going to submit change tickets, modifications will happen. Modifications will often happen to the work breakdown structures. You find new work that needs to be done. So you'll have multiple versions of your WBS. Your scope baseline, your original one, will be the scope as determined at the beginning of your project. And when you move into execution, there will be little changes that occur. So now you've got newer versions of the scope that you compare back to that baseline, because you use the baseline to plan your budget and schedule and all that good stuff. So the WBS itself, all the work that needs to be done, is a part of that baseline. So it's one of the components that fall inside of it. And Ronnie, your notes have that, right? Let me get into our output. Here we go. So the project scope statement. And so, or no, that's the wrong spot. Here we go.
I kind of separate. I did not put WBS underneath scope baseline, which is probably where.
Yeah, so we just need to bump all these in one. So the WBS itself, which is that, and I'm going to just rearrange this a little bit here. The WBS itself, which is that statement of the work that needs to be done, and we'll see that the WBS is just really a diagram. Now, you don't have a whole heck of a lot of room as you're creating that WBS, especially if you're doing a diagram. You're going to have simple words. So a lot of times you're going to use abbreviations and other terminology that may be unique to your organization. So typically when you draft the WBS, at the same time you are creating a WBS dictionary, all right? The WBS dictionary is what it sounds like. It's a dictionary that lists all the terminology that you used in your work breakdown structure and what it actually means. So you're kind of elaborating on it, the deliverables, the activities, any other scheduling information you might have, any budgeting information, all that other stuff that just didn't fit in that nice little outline view goes into this WBS dictionary. All right. And so you'll see all the different things that you'll want to put in there, descriptions of the work, assumptions and constraints. Most of the stuff is really straightforward, stuff we've already talked about. One of the only things that makes it in here that we haven't talked about so far is this guy right here, Code of Account Identifier. All right. Many organizations will have to, even if you're using your own employees internally, will have to handle billing, right? So my company, if I'm designing a website, I may have web designers on staff. Well, when I bring one of my web designers into the project, I may need to show financially that my project is paying for their time while they're working on my project. And when they're working on somebody else's project, their time is being paid by that other project. And so we may have a code of account identifier that shows when I'm using that web designer, they have a salary. And here's what I'm paying per hour while I use them. And here's the code that I credit that to. So when the billing takes place in our accounting department, they know that this isn't a real bill. I'm not cutting a check. They're just saying when that person's salary gets paid from the company, it's being charged to my project. So we can tell exactly how much my project cost, right? It's a very common thing. It's some people call it internal billing. There's different names for it, but you may have a code system that references that. And the code system is completely arbitrary. It's determined by you guys, but it's normally one of the most common ones that I've seen is where it'll be like a three number, separated by decimals. So the first digit will identify like your department. So if I'm in IT, that might be department 5. So it'll be 5 dot, and then after that it'll be one that'll identify the type of expense. And so you'll have things like facilities, maintenance, subscriptions, projects, and then you have a period. And then under projects, you'll have this third one, which is identifying your project. So when you start up, you might have a project that says your project is 5.2.371, right? And so anything that needs to get billed to your project will use that code of accounting. Well, that web designer may have his own code of accounting that refers back to the web design department. And so it'll be an IT, so 5 dot, and then the web designers might be dot 12, and then the allocation code or whatever that follows that references that we're basically pulling one of these assets, bill it to our project. So code of account identifiers, if you use them, you want to put those in the work breakdown structure to specify where the money is going for each of these work breakdown structure work activities or work packages. All right, but all the other stuff here, is if we have it, great. If you know the resources required, if you know the people and materials, great, put it in there. If you know the cost, quality, the schedule, if you know that stuff, put it in there. If you don't know it, we'll determine it later, and then we'll put it in here after the fact. So we may have to come back to our WBS later on, right? You'll see any acceptance criteria, which should be in our scope already, our agreement information, all of that stuff should be there. All right, and then project document updates, what we kind of expect to see. All right, now I did just a quick and dirty example here of a work breakdown structure, and we saw the diagram, but let me show you guys a couple of other templates that we may use if we have a scope management plan, right? So going back to this idea, the scope management plan will likely tell us how to build our work breakdown structure. It will tell us whether we should be using code of accounting. It'll tell us the things to have. And so if I go into my my templates, where did I put those? Here we go. So on the work breakdown structure, I'll just pull this one up here. So this is the one from the PMI site. I had to redo it to get it to work here. But you'll see that it's just a straight up layout here of an outline, and they went ahead and assigned numbers to it. So we can do it that way, just like I showed in my little notepad window there. All right. The dictionary, we don't need that. If I go back to my work breakdown structure dictionary, here we go. This is a little more complex because the dictionary is cataloging all sorts of different stuff. So let's take a look at some of the things that are found in the work breakdown structure dictionary. We've got the work package name. So we're going to have a page in the dictionary for every single work package. So this is referencing one thing, right? Maybe this is for our realtor one, right? So get referrals from friends. So that's going to be our work package. The code of account for this package, right? Who's going to get billed for this?
Right.
The description of the work that needs to get done, all right? What do we need to do to go out and get these referrals? And then any assumptions and constraints. Assumption might be that we have friends that know realtors, right? So there we go. Then if this work package is big enough, it might have milestones in it, right? Or we might set some arbitrary ones. So we're getting referrals. So we want to get 15 referrals. So we'll have milestones at 5, 10, and 15. So they can let us know, hey, yeah, I've got 5. I'm still working on more. Now I've got 10, if it's a big one. But if this is a simple thing that might only take an hour or two, we don't normally bother with the milestones. And then due dates, when this needs to be done by. All right, after that, we break down any activities that might be a part of this work package if it breaks down further. If it doesn't, then we just have one activity and we specify its ID number. That ID number will be important later on because we're going to tie it into the schedule. And you can specify the resources if you know them, the amount of time, the rate, the total, right? This is all going to lead towards your cost. Your materials, again, leading towards cost, and so you get a total here for your total cost. So this will help with scheduling and budgeting down the road. And here we'll see the other things that were in the PMBOK: quality requirements, acceptance criteria, technical information, agreement information, all right out of the PMBOK. So we'll create these for each of our work package elements, and we'll bond those together, and that'll be our work breakdown structure dictionary. So when you look at the WBS itself, it's pretty high level. It's not, not a lot of explanation in it. But then you go to the dictionary for that particular package, and you'll find everything you need. Descriptions of the work, terminology that we used, anything that is in here that's special, it's all going to be right here in the WBS dictionary. All right. And I also mentioned the scope management plan, right? So let's go back to that, because that's kind of the last piece of this whole puzzle. If we go back to the, let's see, that's not what I want. If we go back to the PMBOK, the only other element that we've got here, we collected our requirements in the last episode. I just cannot click today. We collected our requirements in the last episode. We defined the scope at the beginning of this episode. We just created our WBS. The only thing we really didn't do was that scope management plan. If your company already has one, great, but you may need to create one. So now that we've got this under our belt, now that we've seen how we gathered our requirements, we've seen how we created our WBS, we'll want to go back and create a scope management plan so that we've got it. And the next time we go through this process, we'll be able to use that plan to direct us, right? So if I go back here and pull up my scope management plan template, we'll see in here scope statement development. How do you create your scope statement, right? So we might put in here, use template scope statement.docx, right? Very specific. Use this template, and then get review from these people and put in this information. So all the details we need on how our company creates scope statements. And then how do we create our WBS structure? It's got to be a diagram, and you've got to use Primavera to generate it, all right? Or it might be just do an outline and use Word, don't do anything crazy. You specify how you create that work breakdown structure. The WBS dictionary, what template do you use? What information needs to be in it? So you're specifying the guidelines of how that gets created. Scope, baseline, maintenance. If we need to change the baseline, how we allow those changes to happen. Now we're going to see that later on, so I don't want to dive too deep into that. And so you'll see the baseline maintenance, that's how many copies of the scope we want to maintain, and scope change, how we make those changes that generates those copies. So those two are linked together. How we determine deliverable acceptance. This isn't the deliverable acceptance for our project, this is how we determine it for any project. And then scope and requirements integration. Are all our requirements listed in the scope? Is there a separate requirements document, and are they tied together? I tied them together. In our example, I said see Exhibit A. So we can specify that here. If you have a separate requirement sheet, attach it as an exhibit to the scope.
Right.
That's the kind of thing you would put here. And when that's done, going forward, the next time you have to create a scope statement, you would grab this scope management plan and you'd read through it, and it's telling you how to go about doing that. All right. That's the purpose of this plan, and then this becomes part of the project management plan. And so again, the next time you do a project, you've got this overall sweeping plan, and you go through and you get that data together.
Right.
All right, so there's an example of that. And once that's complete, now we've actually finished the planning for our scope. Now we know what our project needs to do. We have a better understanding of what we're about to embark on. Now we need to work on details. And you'll see that's the next several things. We need to figure out our schedule. We need to figure out our cost, and we need to figure out our quality. Quality really means how well we meet our requirements. So those are our triple constraints, right? Cost, requirements, schedule, or budget. So those are the next things that we need to figure out. Beyond that, we got a few other things to worry about is getting resources, people, and materials to complete the project, how we're going to communicate, right? So these are some other components that are in here. But the next three things that we do are really important because they're the details. And that's how we're going to start to find out how long this is going to take, how much it's going to cost us, and whether or not we think it's going to be feasible. So we're going to start to see that. All right, Ronnie, I think that pretty much wraps up the
think so,
scope side.
too.
Can you think anything I left out?
Not really. Yeah, this is pretty detailed.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a good spot for us to stop. So let me just remind you guys that if you have any questions live during the show, you can go to itpro.tv/live. You'll see the chat room right beneath the video. You can post your questions. We monitor and answer during the show. If you have questions after the show, use our Q&A forums. Hit that Q&A link at the top of every page. It'll take you into the forums, and we monitor and answer. We want to make sure you guys get the information you need so that you can be successful on the exam and successful in your career, right? That's very important.
True.
All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Signing out for IT Pro TV, I'm Don Pizzette,
I'm Ronnie Wong.
and we will see you next time.